"Hey, sweetheart, grab us another round." The words cut through the ballroom like a dropped glass, sharp and deliberate. Laughter followed, bouncing off marble floors and glittering chandeliers. Eyes turned, amused, expectant. Rachel Carter didn't move. She stood near the champagne tower in an ivory dress. No sequins, no jewelry, nothing flashy to announce her presence. She lifted her phone, steady hand against her ear, her gaze fixed on the woman pointing at her. Behind that woman, a row of tuxedoed men grinned, one snapping his fingers like she was staff. "It's begun," Rachel said softly into the phone. "Shut it down. All of it." The words were almost swallowed by the music, but something in her posture unsettled the laughter. She didn't look cornered. She looked in control. "You catering?" a tall man called out, raising his champagne flute. "Hustle, and you'll earn a tip." His companion leaned in, smirking. "This is investors only, darling. Best move along." The ballroom hadn't gone quiet, but the energy shifted. A violin note quivered, faltered. A photographer paused mid-frame. Near the stage, a young reporter slid her phone free, angling it toward Rachel, her camera catching the moment between crystal glasses. Rachel's expression barely moved, the faintest curve of a smile that wasn't for them. She'd learned the shape of mockery long ago, how privilege cloaked itself in politeness, how dismissal wore a tuxedo. "Security," the tall man barked. At the entrance, a guard looked up, uncertain. The older woman in pearls, sharp eyes, polished disdain, stepped forward. She ripped the event pass from Rachel's wrist with a sound loud enough to pull heads from conversations. "Get her out." Rachel stayed rooted. The phone never left her ear. "Priority 1 confirmed," she said, calm as stone. The reporter, Emma Hayes, felt her grip tighten on her phone. She didn't know this woman, but she recognized the look. Quiet defiance, the kind that shifted rooms without raising a voice. Around them, whispers stirred. Some guests frowned, uncomfortable. Others smirked, sensing blood. The tuxedoed group only grew louder, voices rolling like they owned the air. "Which table even hired you?" the tall man pressed, his tone sharper, commanding. "You're delaying service," the pearl matriarch added. "People are waiting." Rachel's eyes never left theirs. She shifted her weight slightly, the dress catching light like porcelain. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't afraid. Emma lifted her phone higher, the red record light glowing now. This wasn't just a scene anymore, it was evidence. A moment about to break past the ballroom walls. A passing waiter slowed, his tray trembling just slightly. He didn't speak, but his jaw locked tight, his silence its own kind of witness. The chandelier above glowed colder, sharper, as though it too understood the shift. What had started as a taunt was already unraveling, though none of them realized just how fast the tide was about to turn. Heels clicked against marble as Margaret Steele advanced, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier light with each step. "Sweetheart, this event is for investors who actually matter." Her voice carried like a gavel, sharp and dismissive. She glanced back at the security guard, a man in his 40s with a close-cropped haircut and a silver earpiece. "Escort her out. Now." The guard didn't move at first. His hesitation hung in the air, and Rachel Carter noticed. She'd seen it before. That pause when a man in uniform weighed policy against prejudice and wasn't sure which way the scale would tip. Eventually, he began walking toward her, careful, deliberate. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'll need to see your credentials." "They're gone," Rachel answered, nodding toward the torn pieces of her past dangling from Margaret Steele's manicured fingers. Emma Hayes adjusted her phone, capturing Margaret holding the shredded badge like proof of conquest. The older woman smirked. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. You already chose hard." Rachel lowered her phone just enough so her voice could carry, then raised it back to her ear. "Move the capital to Harlow. Don't wait for the signing." "Joel." A current surged through the ballroom. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers cutting through the music. One man in a gray suit leaned toward his wife. Did she just say Harlow? Her eyes widened, lips parting in disbelief. Richard Hale scoffed loudly, shaking his head as if swatting away a fly. "Is this some kind of stunt? You expect us to fall for a bluff?" No bluff, Rachel replied, calm, unshaken. Just business. Emma stepped forward, voice clear but steady. For the record, she was invited. I saw her name on the investor list this afternoon. Richard laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. You must have misread it. I didn't. Emma shot back, lifting her phone higher. And I'm not the only one who saw it. Behind the circle of tuxedos, a young waiter paused, his tray of water glasses trembling. She's telling the truth, he said quietly. His words weren't loud, but the conviction in them landed. For just a moment, Margaret's smirk faltered. Rachel caught it. Everyone caught it. The silence stretched long enough to matter before Rachel spoke again, measured and calm. Phase 2 is in motion. The guard stopped mid-step, confusion flickering in his eyes. He didn't know what Phase 2 meant, but he sensed it wasn't going to favor the people who'd summoned him. The air grew heavy, pressing down on every glance and whisper. The quartet still played faintly in the corner, but the music felt hollow, like it belonged to another evening. Margaret moved closer, her perfume sharp, her voice louder, meant for the entire ballroom. People like you always try to slip into places you don't belong. Rachel's gaze held steady. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Richard pulled a fresh event pass from his pocket, someone else's, holding it up with exaggerated mockery. Here, maybe this one will match the story you're selling. Then, with deliberate cruelty, he tore it in half. The pieces drifted down like ash, scattering across the polished floor. Gasps rippled through the room. Emma was already circling, her phone steady, documenting every second. She's stalling, Margaret barked at the guard. Remove her. The guard stepped forward again, slower now. On what grounds? Rachel asked, her voice level, unyielding. Fraud, Richard snapped. She's pretending to be someone she's not. Trying to insert herself into a $900 million transaction. That number froze the air. Conversations at nearby tables broke off mid-sentence. Heads turned. A man in a tailored navy suit leaned to his companion, his tone hushed but urgent. 900 million? Did you hear that? The chandelier light sharpened above them, as though the room itself understood something was about to break. That's the size of the Whitmore deal. The words rippled through the crowd, carried on a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. Rachel Carter's lips tightened, not from anger, but with deliberate precision. She lowered her phone just enough to speak into the charged air. Confirm full withdrawal of capital. Redirect to Harlow Group. Notify both legal teams. Margaret Steele's eyes narrowed, but Rachel was already lifting the phone back to her ear. Somewhere across the room, a guest choked on champagne. Richard Hale let out another laugh, though it cracked in the middle, brittle instead of bold. You can't redirect anything, he barked, but the edge in his tone betrayed him. You're no one here. From the back of the room, the young catering staffer found his voice again, louder now. She's not no one. Nobody cancels a $900 million deal unless they own a big piece of it. Margaret spun toward him, pearls glinting as her voice snapped. Stay out of this, boy. Too late. Emma Hayes interjected, her tone sharper now, her phone raised higher. You made it everyone's business the moment you tore up her pass. The security guard froze 2 steps from Rachel, his gaze darting between Margaret, Richard, and the growing circle of onlookers. A few guests now held up their own phones, red record dots blinking like silent protests against the spectacle. Rachel's voice remained steady, quiet enough to make people lean in, yet strong enough to command the space. One last time, are you certain you want me removed? Absolutely. Margaret snapped, not even pausing. She nodded toward the guard. Do it. The guard hesitated, but stepped forward. That was when Rachel moved, not back, but forward, closing the gap between herself and her accusers. The suddenness of it made Margaret's shoulders stiffen, her flawless posture faltering just enough for the room to see. You just told the wrong woman she doesn't belong in the room she paid for, Rachel said evenly. She hadn't raised her voice, but every word struck like glass on stone. The air in the ballroom changed. Not buzzing anymore, vibrating. Energy poured through every glance, every whisper, until the silence itself felt electric. Rachel held her phone steady, her gaze locked on Margaret. Proceed to phase 3, she said into the receiver. Understood. Came the crisp voice of Rebecca, her chief of staff, from the other end. Legal is live. Capital transfer in progress. Richard tried to scoff, but it came out hollow. Phase 3? What is this supposed to be, a game? Rachel turned her eyes on him for the first time. Not a game. An audit. The words landed like iron dropped from a height, their weight impossible to ignore. Richard blinked hard, as though the ground had shifted beneath him. Emma's voice broke in, clear and deliberate. If she's bluffing, why do you look nervous? Her camera lens caught Rachel and her accusers in the same frame, an image sharp with contrast. Margaret's chin lifted, her tone quick and defensive. Because this woman is trying to humiliate my family at a public event. No, Rachel said softly, the calm in her tone cutting sharper than anger ever could. I'm letting your own actions speak louder than I ever could. The security guard shifted again, uncomfortable now, sensing the power wasn't where it had been minutes ago. He'd seen stunts at high-profile events before, but this wasn't theater. Something was unraveling, and it wasn't unraveling in Rachel's direction. By the champagne tower, the young waiter whispered to his colleague, his voice trembling with awe. She's in control. Look at her. She hasn't taken a step she didn't mean to. Rebecca's voice came back through the line, crisp and decisive. Corporate has flagged the Whitmore portfolio for breach of good faith. Do you want me to loop Harlow's team in now? Rachel's eyes swept the room. More phones were raised now, some cautious, some bold, all of them witnesses. Yes, she said. Make it loud. Richard forced out another laugh, but it rang hollow. Even if you had the power, no one cancels a $900 million deal in the middle of a gala. That's not how the world works. Rachel's gaze cut through him, steady and absolute. That's exactly how the world works, when you own the deal. That's exactly how my world works, Rachel Carter said, her voice steady enough to slice through the charged air. Margaret Steele stepped forward again, pearls glittering under the chandelier, her tone sharpened like a blade. Do you even know who you're speaking to? Yes. Rachel's smile flickered, faint but undeniable. The real question is, do you? The words didn't just land. They cracked through the circle of onlookers, snapping something wide open. Faces shifted, guests who had been watching in silence, now piecing together the truth. Emma Hayes took a measured breath, her phone still steady. I think we're all about to find out. The guard froze where he stood. The order was clear, but his instincts screamed caution. One wrong move here could cost him more than a job. It could cost him a reputation. Rachel lowered her phone at last. Her voice carried a calm finality, like the moment before a judge reads the verdict. You've called me a fraud. You've destroyed my credentials. You've tried to erase me from a deal I built. Through all of it, I've been patient. She stepped forward. Not far, just enough to shrink the space until it felt intimate, suffocating. Patience is over. Rebecca's voice came sharp and clean through the line. All parties notified. Press statement drafted. You're clear to proceed. Rachel's eyes never left Margaret and Richard. Good, she said. Let's end this. The ballroom seemed to lean in. The chandelier light tilted, as though the room itself wanted to bear witness. Every camera lens followed her now. Even the quartet slowed, bows hovering, the music collapsing into silence. Rachel walked into the open space, heels striking marble with deliberate rhythm, each click a countdown. For the last 15 minutes, you've treated me like I stumbled in by mistake, she said. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried, steady and precise. You accused me of fraud. You called security. You tore my credentials in front of 200 people. Richard folded his arms, a smirk twitching at the edge of his mouth. Margaret's jaw locked, but her fingers trembled against the clutch she gripped too tightly. And through all of it, Rachel continued, you never once asked my name. The pause hit like thunder rolling just before a storm. Phones lifted higher. The air was taut, waiting. I am Rachel Carter, she said, her gaze cutting through the ballroom. CEO of Carter Global. Architect of the very deal you gathered to celebrate tonight. The Whitmore acquisition worth $900 million? I built it. I funded it. And as of 5 minutes ago, I transferred it to your competitor. The words detonated like dynamite in a mine shaft, sending shockwaves through the room. Margaret blinked, lips parting but empty of sound. Richard's smirk fell, his arms sagging at his sides. Guests gasped, the sound swelling outward until it became a tide. Somewhere at the edge of the room, someone clapped once, sharp, decisive. Others followed, scattered at first, then growing, applause mixing with murmurs of disbelief. "You're bluffing," Richard said at last, but even he didn't believe it. Rachel tilted her head. "Check your phone." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a verdict. Richard pulled his device out with unsteady hands. His eyes scanned the screen. The color drained. Margaret fumbled for her own phone, her perfect manicure shaking as she scrolled. Guests all around them reacted in real time, phones buzzing with the same breaking news alert. Whitmore Global loses $900 million deal. Harlow Group secures acquisition. Emma's camera caught everything. The moment Margaret's posture collapsed, pearls catching the light as her shoulders dropped. Richard turned, looking for a way out, but the crowd closed in. There was nowhere left to run. Rachel's voice sliced into the stunned quiet. "I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg the press. You did the work for me." The words hung there, final and unshakable, as the weight of what had just happened settled over the room. "All I did," Rachel Carter said evenly, "was let you be seen." The security guard drew back half a step, as though realizing he was no longer standing between a guest and protocol, but between duty and disaster. At the far end of the ballroom, the young catering staffer leaned to his colleague, voice low but sure. "She owns the room now." No one challenged it. The moment the push notification spread across the hall, the atmosphere broke wide open. Conversations splintered mid-sentence. Champagne flutes hit tabletops too hard, crystal ringing like alarm bells. Richard Hale's face burned red, not from triumph, but from collapse. His jaw clenched, loosened, clenched again before he muttered toward Margaret Steele, "We can fix this." "No," Margaret snapped back, her voice clipped with panic. Her eyes cut toward the doors, but there was no exit left. Not from the crowd of phones raised like 1,000 tiny spotlights. Emma Hayes didn't lower her lens. She zoomed closer, capturing the pearls tightening against Margaret's throat as her composure slipped. Across the room, the young waiter set down his tray and folded his arms, a faint, defiant smile breaking on his face. The quartet had given up entirely now. Bows rested at their sides, the musicians watching like everyone else, as if the real performance had finally revealed itself. One of the Whitmore family's own advisors, a man in a tailored navy suit, pushed forward. "Rachel, this isn't necessary. We can renegotiate." Rachel didn't turn to him. Her reply was measured, razor sharp. "You had your chance to speak to me when you thought I was serving drinks. You wasted it." The security guard shifted, his stance softening. "Ma'am, my apologies." His words were quiet, but they carried through the hush. Rachel's gaze softened for just a flicker, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement, before she turned back to the Whitmores. "Look, we didn't," Richard began, desperation breaking through his tone. "You did," Rachel cut in, the finality in her voice slicing his protest clean in half. "And now you live with it." Emma's voice, steady but tinged with awe, slipped into the air. "This is what happens when power walks in quietly." Her words were recorded, carried, etched. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some guests began to clap again, steadier this time, the applause swelling in the high ceilings. Others stood still, phones steady in their hands, knowing they were recording a moment that would outlive the ballroom. Margaret tried one last desperate move. "We can make this right." Rachel stepped forward, not fast, not hostile, just deliberate enough to close the space. Rye would have been recognizing me before I had to announce myself. Rye would have been treating any stranger with basic dignity. What you have now is the deal you lost. Silence clamped down, heavier than any shout. The young waiter spoke again, his voice firmer this time, his words cutting deeper than Margaret's pearls ever could. "You don't get to erase someone twice." It landed like a hammer. Even the security guard gave a slow, deliberate nod. Rachel straightened her shoulders. "This conversation is over. And so is your claim to my time." Phones followed her as she turned toward the exit. The murmurs of the crowd moved like a tide receding, carrying her name with them. Behind her, the Whitmores remained frozen, pearls, tuxedos, and postures that now looked like costumes from a failed play. Then came the sound, vibrations rattling against silk and glass. Richard's phone buzzed twice, an urgent tremor in his palm. He glanced down, his face draining at the sight. 3 missed calls from the Whitmore board chair. Margaret's clutch chimed a second later, her ringtone sharp and scolding as it cut through the silence. She didn't answer. Across the room, the advisor in navy ducked away, his phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. And for the first time, everyone could see it. The unraveling wasn't coming. It was already here. Even without catching every word, the message radiated across the ballroom. Damage control was underway, and it was already crumbling. Emma Hayes's lens tracked all of it. The nervous glances, the frantic typing, the tiny betrayals written on faces. Her voice slipped into the mic at her collar, soft but cutting. They're unraveling in real time. Guests who had once clustered eagerly around the Steeles and Hales were quietly breaking away. Polite smiles faded into stiff indifference. A couple standing near the champagne tower didn't even bother with excuses. Mid-conversation, they pivoted, abandoning Margaret and Richard to join the growing circle orbiting Rachel Carter instead. Their posture alone announced their loyalties had shifted. Margaret's pearls trembled as she reached for Richard's arm. Her composure was hanging by threads. "We need to leave. Now." "Not yet," Richard muttered. His teeth clenched as his eyes chased Rachel's retreating figure. But when he looked back, half the investors he relied on were avoiding his gaze as though proximity itself might stain their reputations. The string quartet, silent since Rachel had taken the floor, began packing their instruments. No cue had been given, but they understood. The gala was finished. Whatever celebration had been planned ended the moment Rachel stepped forward. By the catering station, the young waiter leaned toward a colleague. "They're toxic now. No one wants their handshake on camera." He wasn't wrong. What had been the Whitmore Steelhale inner circle now looked like a scattering of desperate figures hunched over their phones, thumbs flying across screens. Their posture told the story before any words could. Panic. A PR handler rushed in from the hall, face tight, tablet in hand. One glance at the display made Richard curse under his breath. Across the ballroom, Rachel's chief of staff, Rebecca, moved easily among a group of Harlow Group executives. Their conversation flowed like an after-party, not a crisis. Contracts were exchanged, smiles traded, and with every handshake the shift of power became undeniable. "She's gutted us in front of everyone," Margaret hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut. Richard didn't answer. His eyes were locked on Emma Hayes's phone, its lens fixed on them with the cold persistence of a spotlight. Behind them, someone muttered just loud enough to carry. "They did this to themselves." The words spread like a fuse catching. Then came the sound that stung most, chairs scraping back. More guests stood, not to chase Rachel, but to distance themselves from the wreckage. The ballroom was emptying, shrinking around the family who had once owned it. Rachel didn't hurry. She didn't need to. Every step toward the exit was deliberate, as though she wanted the Steeles and Hales to feel the hollowing weight of what they'd lost. Rebecca intercepted her halfway, tablet already open. "All Harlow contracts are signed. And per your instructions, Whitmore's investor portal access has been revoked." "Good," Rachel said. Her tone was steady, not gloating, simply final. "Make sure every supplier and vendor in our network is notified before midnight." Rebecca's fingers flew. "Drafting now. Do you want legal copied in?" "Copy them," Rachel replied without hesitation. "Bury them in it." Across the ballroom, Richard finally found his voice. The desperation cracked through his words. "You can't lock us out. We have agreements." Rachel turned just enough for her response to reach him without breaking stride. "Agreements are built on respect. You voided that clause before the night even began." The remaining guests caught her words, and a murmur rolled through them. The kind of acknowledgement that sealed what everyone already knew. The balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. One investor leaned toward another, his voice hushed but reverent. "She's freezing them out completely." The awe in his tone mixed with unease, as if he recognized both the brilliance and the cost of what was unfolding. Rebecca's tablet chimed softly. Vendor notifications sent. IT confirms Whitmore's logins are disabled. Perfect, Rachel Carter replied without hesitation. Now draft the press release. Frame it as a values decision. Make it clear we don't partner with people who humiliate others in public. From her vantage point, Emma Hayes caught the precise moment Rebecca's finger tapped send. Such a small gesture, yet one that would ripple across markets and boardrooms for years. Margaret Steele's composure finally cracked, her voice trembling as she spat. This is vindictive. Rachel turned fully toward her, the chandelier catching the calm steel in her eyes. No, this is leadership. If you think this feels harsh, imagine what it was like to stand here and be told I didn't belong in the very deal I built. Margaret's lips quivered, but she found no reply. A server passed with a tray of champagne. Rachel stopped him with a polite hand, lifted one glass. I'll take this, she said evenly, before turning to the Harlow table. And send another to them. Tell them congratulations. Across the ballroom, the Harlow executives raised their glasses in acknowledgement, the toast carrying more weight than any speech could. The gala's allegiance had shifted. Celebration had changed camps. Rebecca leaned close once more. Do you want me to initiate the portfolio review on Whitmore's holdings? Yes, Rachel answered instantly. Flag everything tied to us, then shut it down. Richard Hale shifted, instinct pulling him forward, but the circle of raised phones kept him rooted. One wrong move, and he knew it would play on every screen in America before sunrise. Rachel set the champagne flute back on the tray without sipping. Her voice was quiet but final. I don't need to toast this. It isn't a victory. It's a correction. She turned again for the exit. Behind her, the Steeles and Hales stood frozen, locked out of more than a ballroom. Then the wave hit. Phones buzzed in pockets and purses, faces lit by the glow of breaking alerts. Emma Hayes read it live, her voice sharp with the thrill of the scoop. Breaking, Carter Global terminates partnership with Whitmore Group, effective immediately, citing breach of values and public misconduct. She looked straight into her lens. That's confirmation, not rumor. This is corporate fact. The migration of power was visible. Harlow executives rose, shaking hands with investors who just minutes earlier had orbited the Steeles and Hales. Deals and reputations flowed like water toward the new center of gravity. An older investor tapped his companion's shoulder. Pull everything tied up with Whitmore before Monday. The man nodded, already typing a note to his broker. In the corner, a PR strategist in a navy sheath dress pressed her phone close. Cancel tomorrow's press conference. No, don't reschedule. We're in salvage mode. Her eyes flicked toward Margaret Steele, then away quickly, as though even proximity could taint her career. The young catering staffer who had spoken earlier passed by Emma and murmured, "It's like watching a skyscraper come down in slow motion." Emma didn't argue. The cameras weren't just aimed at Rachel anymore. They were capturing the implosion, the advisors peeling off, the matriarch staring blankly at the floor, the cluster shrinking by the minute. Meanwhile, Rachel Carter remained composed near the exit, issuing crisp directives to Rebecca. No raised voice, no theatrics. Just strategy. Guests approached her cautiously, offering cards, some daring to introduce themselves. She accepted a few, declined others. Each exchange carried the same message. She wasn't just the center of the room. She was the new gravity pulling everything into orbit. Alliances were shifting in plain sight, and Rachel Carter chose each with intention. Near the edge of the ballroom, a young journalist from another outlet leaned toward Emma Hayes. Is she always like this? So precise. Emma didn't lower her lens. This is the first time I've seen her in action, but I'm starting to think precision isn't just part of her. It is her. Across the room, Richard Hale's phone rang again. He silenced it with a sharp motion and shoved it into his pocket. Margaret Steele finally lifted her gaze, scanning the faces that had once orbited her family. Not one met her eyes. From the balcony above, a photographer captured the entire scene, abandoned tables on one side, a swelling crowd around Rachel on the other. It was more than a picture. It was a diagram of power shifting in real time, the kind of image destined for front pages. By the time Rachel made her final walk to the exit, the steals were already vanishing, not in whispers, but in headlines. Their name was trending not for a landmark deal, but for losing it in the most humiliating way possible. And the ripple had only begun. Hours later, the glass-walled conference room at Carter Global's downtown headquarters bore no resemblance to the glittering ballroom. No chandeliers, no champagne, just a long walnut table, and the silence of people who knew history was moving fast. Rachel sat at the head, Rebecca on her right, two Harlow Group executives on her left. Across from them, the wall screen displayed the market in brutal detail. Whitmore Group stock down 14% in the first hour. Jonathan Pierce, Harlow's silver-haired CEO, leaned back in his chair, studying Rachel with a mixture of respect and calculation. You've gutted their biggest play in a decade. What comes next? Rachel didn't hesitate. We make sure they can't rebuild off anyone else's capital. That means tightening the network. Rebecca slid a thick folder across the table. These are all shared vendors, subcontractors, and partners between Carter Global, Harlow, and Whitmore. We've already moved on 60% of them. By the end of the week, Whitmore won't have the supply lines to stay competitive. Jonathan skimmed the list, then looked up. You're cutting them off completely. I'm cutting them out permanently, Rachel said. If they want to stay in this market, they'll have to rebuild from the ground up. And by then, they won't have leverage or reputation left. A younger Harlow executive tapped his tablet. Press sentiment is still in your favor. If we act quickly, we can frame this as an industry standard. Zero tolerance for public misconduct. Rachel's answer was crisp. Do it. Make it loud enough that anyone even considering siding with Whitmore understands the cost. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She glanced at the notification and allowed herself a faint smile. An investor coalition just confirmed they're pulling $200 million from Whitmore's remaining projects. Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head. You've turned them into a cautionary tale overnight. Rachel's expression stayed steady. Good. That's exactly what they are now. The room fell quiet, the hum of the city beyond the windows filling the space. Then Rachel added, one more thing. I want legal to review every pending trademark, patent, or licensing deal in their pipeline. If it aligns with our portfolio, we buy it before they can. If it doesn't, we tie it up long enough to keep it out of their hands. Jonathan raised a brow. That's aggressive. Rachel met his gaze without blinking. That's necessary. Her plan wasn't reckless. It was calculated, surgical, and firmly within the rules. By the time the meeting adjourned, Whitmore Group's path forward wasn't narrowed. It was suffocated. As the Harlow team filtered out, Jonathan Pierce paused at the doorway, his hand resting lightly on the frame. You know, he said, half smiling. Most people would have settled for walking out of that ballroom with a moral victory. Rachel Carter rose from her chair, gathering the files into a neat stack. Moral victories are for people who want applause, she replied evenly. I want results. With that, she turned toward her office, the glass wall ahead framing a skyline that shimmered like a chessboard she'd already mapped. The setting sun washed the city in gold, glass towers burning in its reflection. From the corner office of Carter Global, Rachel stood with her hands in her pockets, watching the horizon with the calm of someone who knew the board was already hers. On her desk lay a single unopened envelope. The embossed crest of the Whitmore Group was impossible to miss. Rebecca had left it earlier, her voice low. It's marked urgent. Rachel hadn't touched it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it contained. Pleas for reconsideration, apologies dressed up as diplomacy, maybe even a promise of concessions. She turned slightly, her reflection overlaying the vast city outside, a reminder that real power was never in the words of rivals, but in knowing you didn't need to read them. Behind her, the muted television carried a news segment. Images from the gala flashed across the screen, her stride through the ballroom replayed from every angle. The cheer-in scrolled beneath. Rachel Carter sets new standard for corporate conduct. $900 million deal collapse sparks industry reckoning. The anchor's tone was crisp, cutting. The message is clear. Humiliation in the boardroom or the ballroom carries a price. Rachel lifted her coffee, steam rising like a signal, and took a measured sip. Outside, traffic flowed, lights blinked awake across the skyline. The city moved forward, as it always did. But for Margaret Steele and her family, time had frozen. Their empire was unraveling in the same spotlight they had once fought to command. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Jonathan Pierce. Vendor lockout complete. Trademark acquisition underway. They won't recover from this. Rachel's reply was 2 words, already prepared. She sent them without a flicker of hesitation, then let the phone rest face down. For a long moment, she stood silently, the fading light draping her office in amber. She thought back to the torn event pass, the smirk of dismissal, the call for security. Then she remembered the silence in the ballroom as the crowd parted for her exit, and the applause that followed. It wasn't something she had asked for. It was recognition. She set her coffee aside, finally reaching for the Whitmore envelope. Without opening it, she carried it across the room to the shredder. The blades whirred, tearing seal and paper into ribbons that spilled like confetti onto the tray. Rebecca stepped in as the final strip disappeared. Press wants to know if you'll make a statement tomorrow. Rachel shook her head, eyes still on the skyline. The statement's already been made. Outside, the last light of day caught the tallest tower in view, the one etched with Carter Global's name in gleaming letters. It glowed against the deepening sky, steady and unshakable. Rachel let a rare smile curve her lips. Not for the victory, for the certainty. She'd never needed to prove she belonged in any room. She had built the room.